On a warm spring day in 1978, the small town of Oak Hollow, Nebraska, stirred to life just as it had every morning for generations. The sun rose over green pastures, the church bell chimed at 7, and the local baker's aroma drifted down Main Street. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and every secret, or so they thought. But behind the peaceful facade, Oak Hollow harbored a mystery so disturbing, so unfathomable, it would leave generations questioning how someone could simply vanish in plain sight. Welcome to Chilling Mysteries. Today, we're unraveling the bone-chilling case of the vanished cemetery caretaker. A man whose disappearance left behind a trail of secrets buried deeper than the graves he tended, and a series of unsolved murders that continue to haunt Oak Hollow to this day. This isn't just a tale of someone gone missing. It's a labyrinth of lies, deception, and chilling evidence that forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people we trust with our dead? In 1978, Oak Hollow was a town untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The most scandalous thing to happen in recent memory was the mayor's dog running loose during a parade. The town's cemetery, Maple Shade Memorial, was as much a part of daily life as the post office or the diner. Families visited their loved ones, and children dared each other to sneak past the old wrought iron gate after dark, spinning ghost stories about the crumbling mausoleums. But for one man, the cemetery was more than just a landmark. It was his life's work. Joseph Joe Harlan, the cemetery's caretaker, had worked at Maple Shade Memorial for over 15 years. He was a fixture in the community, soft-spoken, reliable, and always with a shovel or rake in hand. He lived in a small house on the edge of the cemetery grounds, a perk of the job, and was known for his meticulous care of the graves and grounds. Locals described him as kind but reserved, the sort of man who listened more than he spoke, who kept to himself and never caused trouble. On the morning of April 9, Joe Harlan was seen tending the oldest section of the cemetery. By noon, he'd vanished, leaving his tools neatly stacked by the gardener's shed, his lunch untouched on the porch, and his house unlocked. It was as if he'd simply evaporated into thin air. At first, no one was alarmed. Joe had been known to take long walks among the headstones, sometimes disappearing into the woods bordering the cemetery. But as hours turned to days, concern grew. The local sheriff was called, and a search began. Volunteers scoured the cemetery, the woods, and the nearby river. They found nothing, no signs of struggle, no tracks, not even a footprint out of place. Joe Harlan had vanished in plain sight. As news of Joe's disappearance spread, the town's initial sympathy gave way to unease. Rumors swirled. Had he run off? Was he the victim of foul play? Or was something even darker at work? But nothing could prepare Oak Hollow for what was to come. 2 weeks after Joe's disappearance, a local family visited the cemetery to place flowers on a relative's grave. As they walked among the headstones, the youngest daughter tripped over a patch of freshly turned earth. Odd, given that no burials had occurred in that section for months. The groundskeeper's absence had already led to some neglect, but this was different. The earth was loose, disturbed. The family alerted authorities, who began digging. What they uncovered was the first of many horrors. Buried beneath the surface was a body, wrapped in a faded blue tarp, hands bound, mouth taped shut. The remains were badly decomposed, but dental records identified the victim as Rachel Larkins, a local woman who had disappeared nearly 4 years earlier. Her case had gone cold, filed away as another missing person, a painful but distant memory for the town. The discovery sent shockwaves through Oak Hollow. Suddenly, Joe Harlan's disappearance was no longer a simple missing person case. It was potentially linked to a murder. And as investigators combed through the cemetery, they found more. Over the next several months, 3 additional bodies were uncovered, each buried in an unmarked grave, each missing person cases from the surrounding counties. The pattern was chilling. All women, all vanished within the last 6 years, all buried within the grounds Joe Harlan had tended so carefully. The investigation escalated quickly. State police, the FBI, and forensic experts descended on Oak Hollow. The once quiet cemetery became a crime scene, its tranquility shattered by search teams and yellow tape. Every inch of ground was examined, every grave checked for signs of disturbance. The small caretaker's house was searched from top to bottom. Inside, authorities found strange items, a collection of women's jewelry hidden in a cigar box, several newspaper clippings about missing person cases, and a journal filled with cryptic entries. The journal would become a focal point of the investigation. Most of the entries were mundane, notes about maintenance, weather, and cemetery visitors, but sprinkled throughout were strange, almost poetic phrases. They come to me in the night. I keep their secrets safe. The earth remembers what others forget. Investigators were left to wonder. Were these the ramblings of a lonely man? Or the confessions of a killer? Even more disturbing, the entries stopped abruptly 3 days before Joe's disappearance. The final entry read simply, "Tonight, the earth will take one more secret." With mounting evidence, suspicion turned squarely on Joe Harlan. But there was a problem. No one could find him. There was no sign of a struggle or blood in his house. His car was parked in its usual spot, keys hanging on the hook. His bank account was untouched, and there was no sign he'd packed any belongings. To the outside world, it looked as though Joe Harlan had simply walked away, or perhaps been erased. Theories abounded. Some believed Joe was a serial killer who had finally fled after his crimes caught up with him. Others were convinced he was the victim of someone else, perhaps an accomplice, or one of the families seeking revenge. There were even rumors of supernatural forces at play, whispered late at night in the town's only bar. But no theory could be proven, and the trail grew colder with every passing day. Investigators dug into Joe's past, hoping for answers. What they found only deepened the mystery. Joe had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no known connections to any of the victims. He'd grown up in a neighboring town, enlisted in the army, and returned to Oak Hollow to care for his ailing mother before taking the caretaker job. His references were glowing. He'd never married, had no children, and lived a quiet, almost monastic life. Neighbors described Joe as polite but distant, a man who kept his own company. He rarely socialized, and his only regular visitor was the town priest, who would stop by once a month for tea and conversation. The priest, Father McKinnon, described Joe as troubled by the weight of his work, but never cruel. When pressed about the journal entries, Father McKinnon admitted that Joe had become increasingly withdrawn in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, expressing fears that the dead were restless. But investigators couldn't shake the mounting evidence. The jewelry, the clippings, the bodies, all pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the cemetery. The graves had been expertly concealed, the earth packed in a way only a seasoned caretaker would know. Yet, there was no direct link, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses who'd seen Joe with any of the victims. As the focus remained on Joe, the families of the victims demanded answers. The Larkins, whose daughter Rachel had been the first body discovered, became the voice of the community, pushing for more resources, more media attention, and, ultimately, justice. Their pain echoed through the town, fueling a sense of dread that something evil had been hiding in plain sight all along. The investigation dragged on for months, then years. More graves were checked, but no additional bodies were found. The cemetery was eventually closed to the public, its gates locked and overgrown with weeds, a grim monument to the town's darkest secret. But the case didn't end there. In 1982, nearly 4 years after Joe Harlan vanished, a hiker discovered a faded army duffel bag deep in the woods bordering the cemetery. Inside were several items of clothing, a photograph of Joe as a young man, and a pocketknife engraved with his initials. Forensic testing was inconclusive. The bag had been exposed to the elements for years, but it reignited interest in the case. Had Joe run off into the woods and met his end? Or was someone trying to throw investigators off the trail? Theories about Joe's fate multiplied. Some insisted he died in the woods, his body lost to the elements or hidden deliberately. Others whispered about sightings of a man matching Joe's description in towns across the Midwest, always alone, always vanishing before anyone could approach. But none of these leads ever panned out. Joe Harlan remained a ghost, as elusive in life as he was in death. With every passing year, the case became more legend than investigation. It became the subject of whispered stories, cautionary tales for local children, and the occasional tabloid headline. But for true crime enthusiasts, the Oak Hollow Cemetery mystery remains a confounding puzzle. A case with evidence but no closure, suspects but no answers, and victims whose stories deserve to be told. What makes this case so chilling isn't just the violence or the unanswered questions. It's the way evil hides in the mundane, The way someone can move through life unnoticed, trusted, even liked, and still harbor secrets darker than anyone could imagine. It's the way the dead can speak, if only we know how to listen. And then, there's the question that haunts Oak Hollow to this day. Was Joe Harlan a cold-blooded killer who used his position to cover up his crimes? Or was he a scapegoat, a lonely man who became the victim of someone else's evil? The evidence is circumstantial, the confessions ambiguous, and the truth buried as deeply as the victims themselves. In the years since, advances in forensic technology have prompted renewed interest in the Oak Hollow case. DNA testing on the remains has ruled out connections to known serial killers of the era, but no new suspects have emerged. The jewelry found in Joe's house was matched to 2 of the victims, but the remaining pieces remain unclaimed. The journal has been analyzed by criminal profilers and psychologists, some of whom believe the entries point to guilt and remorse, while others argue they are the writings of a man overwhelmed by grief and isolation. Attempts to link Joe Harlan to the victims through travel records, employment history, and social connections have all failed. There is no evidence he knew any of the women outside of their final resting place. Yet, the coincidences are hard to ignore: too many bodies, too many secrets, and too much knowledge of the cemetery's hidden corners. To this day, the Oak Hollow Cemetery remains closed. The caretaker's house stands empty, windows boarded and doors chained shut. Weeds choke the walkways, and the wind whistles through the rusted gates. For the families of the victims, there is only pain and unanswered questions. For the townspeople, the cemetery is a place best forgotten. A scar on the landscape, a wound that refuses to heal. But for those of us who seek truth, who refuse to let the dead be silenced, the case remains open. Somewhere out there is the answer, buried, perhaps, in a forgotten police file, or in the memory of someone too afraid to speak. Or maybe, just maybe, the answer lies with Joe Harlan himself, wherever he may be. Was he a monster, hiding in plain sight? Or just another victim, caught in the web of someone else's evil? The evidence points both ways, and the truth remains just out of reach. But one thing is certain: the dead deserve justice, and their stories demand to be told. If you have any information about the Oak Hollow Cemetery case, or if you believe someone you know may have been affected by these events, please contact your local authorities. And if you're as fascinated and unsettled by this case as we are, don't forget to subscribe to Chilling Mysteries for more true crime stories that will keep you up at night. Remember, evil often hides in the places we least expect. Sometimes, it's buried right beneath our feet. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop searching for the truth. Until next time, keep your lights on, and your secrets safe.